There are those groups of drugs known as hallucinogens or psychedelics that have the capability of acting as both a stimulant and a depressant at the same time, making their classification more difficult, which is why they call them all-arounders. This episode of The Recovery Couch is brought to you by Greg Swartz at Remax Victory and Affiliates. Greg brings heart, hustle, and honesty to every deal. Call Greg at 937-477-8975 today and tell him The Recovery Couch sent you. Hey, what's up, sobriety gangsters? Welcome back to another episode of The Recovery Couch. I'm your host, Brandon Couch, and we are continuing our series, Learning Together, where we're going to go through the Getting Ready to Test, a review preparation manual for drug and alcohol credentialing examinations. Today, we're going to cover all-arounders. What are all-arounders? They are psychoactive drugs, and many texts classify them by the physical action that they cause on the human body, either depression or stimulation of the central nervous system. This tends to keep the classification fairly simple. However, there are those groups of drugs known as hallucinogens or psychedelics that have the capability of acting as both a stimulant and a depressant at the same time, making their classification more difficult, which is why they call them all-arounders. As a result, in this text, we will include the description of all-arounders to include those hallucinogenic psychedelic drugs that can fit either category and include specific reference to the more general physical effects where appropriate. So a brief understanding of hallucinogens and psychedelics. Hallucinogens alter mood, thought, and perception. Though they typically create CNS depression, hallucinogens can also cause stimulation. With the exception of LSD and PCP, hallucinogens are naturally occurring substances. They date back thousands of years. When used in large quantity, many hallucinogens produce toxic effects that can be fatal. Hallucinogens create psychological dependence, but apparently no physical dependence. And then driving while under the influence of hallucinogens is extremely dangerous. People have claimed to see many different visual effects when they're on hallucinogens. So driving on them is extremely dangerous. The facts about hallucinogens and psychedelics: they're a diverse group of drugs, the majority of which are naturally occurring compounds. These drugs have been referred to by such labels as hallucinogens, drugs which induce hallucinations, and psychotomimetics, drugs which mimic a psychotic condition. The term psychedelic fits the category better as it refers to mind expansion or mind manifestation, the ability of the mind to perceive more than it can tell and to experience more than it can explain. That seems important. The term psychedelic fits the category better as it refers to mind expansion or mind manifestation, which is the ability of the mind to perceive more than it can tell and to experience more than it can explain. That's why people have a hard time explaining their trips or their hallucination. The current version of the Diagnostic Statistic Manual refers to the category as hallucinogens. For the purposes of this podcast, we will refer to the category as hallucinogens/psychedelics. Characteristics of the hallucinogenic or psychedelic state include heightened awareness of sensory input, experienced as a flood of sensory experiences, experiencing vivid but unreal imagery, enhanced sense of clarity or clearness, diminished control over what is experienced, heightened perception of the surrounding environment, overlapping of sensory inputs. The term for this is called synesthesia. So an overlapping of sensory inputs is synesthesia, and that is due to the overload of sensory inputs to the brain, synesthesia. The normal sensory response area begins to overlap, causing one sensation to be translated into another. For example, people claiming they see sounds, people claiming that they could feel a smell. That is an overlapping of sensory inputs. As a group, hallucinogenic psychedelics tend to distort perception of reality, decrease logical thought, heighten sensation, and change or modify one's state of consciousness. The psychological effects of psychedelics can vary greatly from one user to the other. Typically, they depend on the expectations of the user, the mental state of the user, and the circumstances under which the drug is used. These drugs create central nervous system excitation. So they get excited. And this affects the senses, the time, feelings, moods, experience, and mental processes. The change to the central nervous system is a result of the overproduction or deactivation of various neurotransmitters in the brain. In large doses, such drugs can also produce hallucinations and delusions, referred to as a bad trip. So let's go back in the paragraph where it says that the effects of psychedelics can vary greatly from one use to another. They typically depend on the expectations of the user, the mental state of the user, and the circumstances under which the drug is used. So the bad trip was already kind of predetermined based on the expectations of the user, the mental state of the user, and the circumstance under which they used the drug. In large doses, such drugs can also produce hallucinations and delusions, which is the bad trip we just discussed, though such responses are relatively rare. Many who use psychedelics do so because of the appearance that they are not as dangerous as other types of drugs. While repeated use of psychedelics can lead to a tolerance, the physical side effects are relatively dull. And though there may be a psychological dependence that develops over the course of using, there is no evidence of physical dependence that these drugs create. The various hallucinogenic psychedelics have very diverse histories. One of the most interesting aspects of such drugs is the fact that they are found over most of the world and they're naturally occurring. Many cultures have a history of some type of psychedelic drug use and during some stage of development. It has been suggested that man began using such drugs after noticing the change in effects such products created in animals. Because of the variety of drugs in this category, we will review both the history and the physical effects of each drug discussed. Today, we're going to talk about hallucinogenic mushrooms. So as this series progresses, while we talk about the all-arounders or the hallucinogen psychedelic drugs, you can come back to learning together and you will get the briefing on what they are again. For each episode after this, we're going to cover specific drugs. So today we're covering hallucinogenic mushrooms. Fly agaric or Amanita muscaria is a hallucinogenic mushroom common to many parts of Europe and Asia. Its use dates back hundreds of years, perhaps thousands of years. Various legends report it across a variety of cultures. It was used in ancient India and referred to as soma in their poetry. It was used medicinally and recreationally by people in that area that is modern-day Afghanistan. The Vikings of Norway were said to use the mushroom to create their ferocity in battle. Interestingly enough, the active ingredient of the mushroom, muscimol, is excreted unchanged in the urine. Because of this, and due to the relative scarcity of the mushroom, people often saved their drug-containing urine and reused it. Such practices have been reported among people in Siberia and Eastern Europe. Another variety of mushroom called Teonactyl was used in religious ceremonies by Central American Indians. Stone carvings found in the region suggest that the use of the mushrooms date back to at least 1000 BC. Spanish explorers reported that Indians used it both socially and in religious ceremonies, referring to the mushroom as God's flesh. Teonactyl is a member of the Psilocybe genus. More popular in North America is the psilocybin mushroom. Psilocybe caerulescens, Stropharia cubensis, and several other members of the Psilocybe genus make up the psilocybin mushroom. Native American Indians noted that the mushroom only grew in excrements of grain-feed animals, and that when consumed by animals, there was profound behavior change. As a result, they were used in religious ceremonies and manhood rites by a variety of Native American tribes. Psilocybe mushrooms affect perception and cognition similar to the effects of mescaline and LSD, but to a lesser degree. They produce very strong visual distortions as well as vivid and colorful illusions. In the body, the chemicals in the mushroom are changed to psilocin, which then enters the brain. There, it depletes the neurochemical serotonin. 1 to 5 grams of the dried mushroom would be required for its psychedelic effect, the equivalent of 20 to 60 milligrams of active ingredient. The compound has been synthesized in laboratory settings. The effects begin within 30 minutes and have a duration of 3 to 6 hours. Tolerance develops rapidly, though physical dependence does not appear. So that is hallucinogenic mushrooms. Again, we're going to go through all of the hallucinogen psychedelics over the next however many episodes. Next episode, we'll cover peyote and mescaline. And remember, you always have a seat right here on the Recovery Couch. This episode of the Recovery Couch is brought to you by JB Davis at South Dayton Toyota. For integrity, service, and unbeatable deals, call JB and his team at 513-267-5225 and tell them the Recovery Couch sent you.